at the Seattle Center where they have all the exhibits, there's the eight to 10 tables that unspokentruths.org, where Delbert, the educator, has all this information that we've never seen. Most of us non-Asians have not seen before. And there was this Black man with his 3 Black children that are, I think 5 to 12 years old. And we're at the part of the end of the table where they have the Black men that are, and women hung up, lynched. And there's 5,000 Black folks who were lynched. And I couldn't get close enough to actually hear. I was going to ask him and I couldn't. I was trying to look at their reactions to see when they see Black bodies strung up like that. I was trying to ooh, that'd be so interesting to hear. But I was trying to not, get in their way or anything. But I'm just like, what is that? Yeah, I was just very.
What does it feel like?
I wanted to see their reactions. I mean, I was kind of tearing up there. I don't have kids, and Asians right now are certainly murdered all the time. But they're not, I guess they're not public like that. But just curious of what that sounded like, what the father's words sounded like, and what their reactions were. And I couldn't. And I was so proud. I was going to just kind of hey, thanks for it. I mean, it just didn't, I really wanted to talk to the guy, but I don't want to be in his business and say something inappropriate on accident too. But I was just so proud that he was showing his kids the truth, because they're not going to get that education other places. And to see visuals of these, it's one thing to be told oh, that was a long time ago. Okay, here are pictures. Okay. That's going to sit in your head for a while.
Absolutely. It's like the other day. It was this morning, actually, the Smithsonian Channel, which I watch from time to time. They usually have at least 4 or 5 of these a day, where they focus on a state for an hour. So it'll be Utah.
Oh yeah, you told me about that. Yeah.
Massachusetts, whatever. Well, today it was Utah. And so what they do, it's because it's all drone footage, basically. So they have a narrator who's very informative, and then you have the footage. And then they went to a spot where there was internment camps. And it's the same, it's what you're talking about. It's like, I can read about the internment camps, but then even if I go to Hawaii or I go to places around Washington, and I can actually stand there and imagine, okay, this is where this person had to live in this makeshift, and they could not leave. And then I hear somebody make an insensitive remark, and this happened years ago, but I still think the sentiment's there. Well, what do they have to complain about? They had free room and board, and, that was the time. Those were the times. I love that excuse. Those were the times. So does that make it any less wrong? And if, it's just like with slavery. I mean, they had people who were anti-slavery, and there were people with the Underground Railroad and all the abolitionists and all this stuff. So if it was the time, why didn't everybody think that way? Not everybody thought that way. Some people realized it was wrong. So why can't we realize just how wrong it was? Doesn't matter if it was 300 years ago or it was last week. So I think you're right. I think people need to be, no, I don't want any 8-year-old white kid to be traumatized, but they need to know, especially when they're getting this other dose of patriotism, of waving flags, and how great our founding fathers. Whenever somebody says our founding fathers, I always correct them. I say the founding fathers, because they weren't my founding fathers. They were slave owners. Let's face it. That's what's important to me. I don't care what they founded. They enslaved people and killed them.
Okay, a couple of threads I want to pick up on. Right. Incarceration, which
internment or incarceration.
Same.
Yeah, basically.
Same thing. And so the in the what's the style book, the writing style book, it was changed to say, we don't say it's not internment, it's incarceration. To make sure that, and it was a camp? No, it was a concentration camp. Different than a Jewish concentration camp, but it still was a concentration camp. And were they evacuated? No, they were Forgot what that term was, but
Imprisoned?
imprisoned or forced out, forced out.
Hmm.
So
Oh,
that
I see.
we're back at these tables here. So I didn't see any white uh kids. I mean, I don't know if were there any white kids at the thing. So I didn't see that. So that would be very interesting too. But what Dilbert is doing is just so incredible. And I've run into him a number of times and gone around with him talking to white people and Trump supporters and having them look at the different shackles and having these conversations. I'm like, wow, he is incredible to be able to reach such a broad audience.
Well, and the other thing I might mention is that, I mean, there are people who will say, and they're not always white necessarily, but they will say, well, I'm not racist. And, they're into this whole kind of colorblind thing. But their willful ignorance about things or their apathy, they contribute to the problem, because it's just like on a more simpler scale, the people who don't catch the racially offensive things that businesses put out.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if you give me a ride and I don't notice that I don't know that you've had 6 beers and now you're going to drive me home. My kind of obliviousness can get me killed. And there's so many people sometimes, and sometimes it's political, who don't want, we don't want to talk about that. That's in the past, that they don't catch things in the present. So when they see marches or they diminish something like, oh, these supremacists were arrested in Idaho, it contributes to the problem, because then it just, oh, well, I guess it's not that big of a deal. Like to me, it's kind of like, what happens if you don't pay attention to an infection? Well, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about, that wound that won't heal. Because then what happens, the next thing you know, it's cancer. And oh yeah, now we have to amputate your leg at the knee because you didn't pay any attention to it. Those people contribute to the problem.
And I'd like to carry on your alcohol, like taking an Uber if the driver had 6 beers. If you said 6 beers, but really I have no other options, and then you didn't tell anybody else, and then that driver killed the next person.
Well, yeah, good point. Yeah, good analogy. It's the same kind of attitude. So just like calling out racism. In fact, speaking of Uber drivers, I think it was either Lyft or Uber. There's a clip of a Uber driver, a Lyft driver, white guy, throwing these 2 white racists out of his car because they get in, they look at him, and the woman says, "Oh, thank goodness you're white." And he says, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And he says, "Oh, well, I mean, I guess she was insinuating, a lot of cab drivers don't speak English, all this other stuff." So he throws them out, and they use the N-word, and they get mad at him and all this stuff. And so then he mentions the name of the business that they came out of, because they own the business. And then now on Yelp, people are, leaving a lot of negative. That's what needs to happen.
Yeah.
Because if you don't call it out, it's kind of like if you knew the neighbor was molesting a child across the street, would you say, well, it's not my kid.
Yep.
I don't want to get involved. No, you'd call the police, right?
I appreciate how you use these everyday, unfortunately, analogies so other people who are not minorities can understand, to make it and I can understand easier. It just makes it easier for me to understand too.
I think it comes down to, still, a lot of people do not see the significance, the seriousness, and the evil that racism really is in all of its, permutations. And because if I use child abuse, everyone will say, I would do something. I would say something, I'd do something. And there'd be other things too, if somebody was being assaulted or whatever. But when it comes to racism, it's like, oh, well, Jolene, let's just ignore that. Or I'm sure they didn't, or they gaslight you. I'm sure they didn't mean anything by that. Or, oh yeah, well, how Uncle Bob is, it's just, they just want to fluff it off, because for one thing, it doesn't usually affect them.
Yeah.
And they don't want to step out and get into that uncomfortable conversation or potentially alienate a relative or something. But then, so they're contributing to the problem by being apathetic.